So today we're going to look at training on the L502, the Afinia L502. This is a little different from our memjet printers, our industrial memjet printers. The L502 is a little simpler in operation, and this training is meant to walk you through some of those settings and get you comfortable with how those work. So you don't have to figure them out on your own. You can reference this video and get comfortable with the L502 operation pretty quickly and easily. So let's jump right in. We have the Hungry Pup label here. This is kind of a standard training label we use for most of our trainings. And we're going to just get started by, and by the way, this is assuming you already have the L502 drivers installed. We're going to go ahead and start our print dialog. So File, Print, or Control P, or any other way that you get into the print dialog. And we've got a screen like this in most cases, or something similar depending on the application that you're using. So we want to start by making sure our L502 printer is selected here. And we like to make sure that our artwork size matches our media size for simplicity. It takes away some of the guesswork, and some of these settings will make a whole lot more sense if you do follow that rule. The only exception to that is if you're doing full bleed, in which case your artwork size should be slightly bigger than your media size. But in terms of the setups and the operation, the process is the same. So we're going to go ahead and select any kind of scaling or zooming to none. And we notice here on the right side of the screen, it's giving us what appears to be an 8.5 by 11 page, which is, it's going to assume out of the box that you are using an 8.5 by 11 label, which is usually not the case for most people. But we do have our label in the middle here. So we're going to go ahead and if you do have an option for orientation, auto orientation, we're going to select that. And now we've got it oriented correctly. And this is assuming your left to right measurement on the label is how it feeds out of the printer. So if it's feeding in the direction that you see my mouse moving out of the printer, this is your left to right. This is the first measurement. So in our case, 6 inches. This is a 6 by 4 label. We're going to measure this as 6 inches wide by 4 inches high. But we do need this media area to match that artwork size. So first thing we need to do, and you only need to do this once for each new label that you print, because once you set this up, the selection will always be available to you in the size selection list. So we start by going into the Properties button here at the top. We click the Advanced button here. Now notice in this drop down is a whole bunch of sizes that we have already set up for our use in customer labels. But we're going to set up a new size. And by clicking on this Manage Custom Sizes, it makes this button available. We're going to click Properties here. And we're going to create a new form. So click this box here. And in form name, we're going to name this anything you want. So typically this is the size that we want to put in here, but sometimes it can be a product name or a customer or whatever helps you identify this label easily and effectively. And I'm entering a number sign here. And what that does is makes this jump to the top of my list. So when you have a very large list like this, you notice there's a whole bunch of stuff in here. And I want to see all of my custom labels that I'm setting up first in the list. So you'll notice by defining this number in front of this form name, it's going to make them appear in the top of the list to make them a little easier to find. So we're going to call this 6 by 4. And that's the dimension of our label. Now we probably already have a 6 by 4 label in here, but we're going to go ahead and create another one for the sake of this training. And then down below, our width and our height need to be defined. Now remember, our width needs to be the first number. That would be our 6 inches. That's our left to right measurement as the label comes out of the printer. So keep that in mind. Even if the orientation of your label is printing differently, you always want that first label or that first number to match your left to right dimension as the label comes off the printer. So in our case, we've got a 6-inch label by 4-inch. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and define 6 by 4, and we're going to say Save Form. And now that appears here in the list. Now on the L502, in order to select this size for future printing, you have to close out of all of these dialog boxes. So go ahead and click OK to all of those to return to our main screen here. Okay, and now by clicking our properties button and going back in to the advanced section here, we can now see that label size that we had created should appear in the list, and here it is. So we're going to select that and click OK. Now click OK again, and you notice how this fills in differently. Now it is oriented strangely, so we're just going to say portrait for our orientation, and this setting may change for you depending on the label. This is just what works for me right now in this situation with this artwork, but you should notice that this fills the space with no white border. Okay, and that tells us we've got a really good setup on our hands, and we can go ahead and print with this. But before we print, we want to go back into properties here. So this was just this, the steps to set up a new label size. And again, it's a one-time thing. You only have to do it once, and that label size will always be available to select. So going through the rest of the selections here, the areas of concern are this media type. So if we drop this down, we see several different selections for media type. Now, the rule here is these do not need to match the actual media type that you've loaded in the printer. These are a good jumping off point for good color absorption and ink absorption for these media types, but you can mix and match them. So if I have a glossy label, I could use premium matte label. It's just what gets you the best quality, best print quality possible. And you use that setting, whatever setting you want that achieves the best result. Okay. The one thing to keep in mind here is different inkjet media types have different ways of absorbing ink, and that inkjet coating works with those media types in different ways. So if you do find that selecting one of these options, you get a label coming out of the printer that has wet ink on it, and you are not able to, say, run your finger across that label without smearing ink, that media setting is too aggressive. It's laying down too much ink for the absorption to happen immediately. And you should get instant dry with these labels as they come off the printer. They should not be wet and smearable in any way as they come off the printer. If you do encounter that, just play around with a different setting here until you get a good quality setting with instant dry time coming off that printer. Again, you should be able to run your finger across it and not smear it immediately when that label exits the printer. Okay? So we're just going to select this. I always have pretty good luck with premium matte label, so we're going to stick with that. For quality settings, we kind of just leave this at better. Best doesn't really gain you too much. If you are printing very fine text and you do want to step up the quality of that text a little bit, you might get better results with best, but typically most people stick with better and have perfectly fine results with that. The color setting here is pretty self-explanatory. Probably aren't going to want to print black and white with a color inkjet printer, but in case you do, that option is here and available for you. So with those options explained, let's go ahead and go up to settings. And we're going to start with a media type here. This media type needs to match the media type that you're running through the printer. So in cases where you're printing continuous media, so there are zero breaks, it's just a sheet of label media. Typically, you would use something like that for banner printing, or if you're running your labels through a finisher and cutting your own shapes out. This is not a typical selection for an L502 printer, but that's why you would want to use continuous. One of the other two here on top are probably going to be most commonly used. Die cut refers to a label with the waste matrix around each die cut label being removed. So what you're going to have is a label, and then the waxy backing around the edge of that label will be visible. That's die cut labels. Black mark label actually has a black mark printed on the back of that label. Usually that's done if that waste matrix is left intact. So instead of seeing a waxy backing edge, you would see more media, a little sliver of media around that die cut label. So it looks very similar to what I described with continuous, except for it has the die cut labels are still in there. You could still peel off the actual label that you need, but that surrounding matrix is left intact. And what that does is gives you something for that extra ink to soak into when you're doing full bleed labels. Full bleed refers to no white border, color, and ink all the way to the edge of your label. And to do that, we have to apply a little more ink than the actual label size. So if you have, in this case, a 6x4 label, we're actually making our artwork slightly bigger, 6.06 by 4.06, so that the printer thinks you're printing a slightly larger label than you actually are. And that gives you that full bleed printing. Now, when you do full bleed printing, let's imagine we are using black mark media for full bleed printing, and we have a slightly larger artwork size than our label is. We do need to focus on our offsets here, as these printers are not smart enough to know exactly where to print that design to get a perfect full bleed. So the design needs to be centered just right on that label, because usually you only have a fraction of an inch of extra ink spraying all around that label. Okay, so these offsets allow you to fine tune the placement of that design on the label. So typically what you will do is print 2 or 3 copies the first time and see where that design sits. And if you have to adjust it up or down or left or right, you would do it here. And you usually do it in small increments of, say, 0.02, 0.03, something of that range. In the negative, I believe it pushes it down, and in the positive, it pushes it up. So keep in mind, depending on which direction you want to go, these settings will push it up or down, depending on if you're negative or positive, and these settings will push it left or right, depending on if you're positive or negative. Again, you shouldn't really need to go much higher than 0.03 or 0.04. Sometimes, in some cases, you have to do a little more extreme settings on here, but these will generally get you pretty close, somewhere in this range, to where you need to be. So after you set these settings, you're going to print some more tests. You're going to see if you nailed it. If you didn't, come back here, adjust these further until you get it correct. At that point, you can send your entire print job through, and assuming your bleed is large enough, there is a small amount of drift on the print, but not enough to knock that out of alignment, as long as you have these dialed in. So you play around with these, you get that offset just right, send your entire print job through, and you'll have a whole batch of full bleed labels. Units is pretty self-explanatory. Most of us in North America here are going to use inches. Some companies, they do like the being able to specify millimeters. That option is available here if you want to set these. And notice if I click that, these settings all change. The continuous gap adjustment is something you should never have to adjust in most cases, unless you do get media from another supplier who has a very large or very small gap size. In our case, we have a 0.125 gap size on all or most of the media that we sell, and this is very important in that case if you need to adjust that. For cutter adjustment, these printers do cut at the end of the print job, and if you do find that that cutter is engaging into the media itself and not cutting somewhere through the waxy backing or between each label properly, you can adjust this slightly one direction or the other. Okay, with that said, that is the extent of our training. Those are the settings that you need to be focused on. Most of the settings here you see on this screen are relative to, or are specific to, the application we're using. In this case, we use an application called Foxit PDF Editor, which is very, very similar to Adobe Acrobat Reader, which is the free version of Adobe Acrobat. The settings are very similar. It does look different, but generally speaking, you have the same print handling for zooming and fitting a page to the label. You have orientation and all of these other settings. There is a flavor of that in most of these applications. So we don't go over these in this training, but note that there are some settings here that may impact the print of your label, and you do need to adjust these accordingly and play around with them. That is outside the scope of this training, however. That's it. If you do have any questions, you can always reach us at sales@chicagocolorlabel.com. You can reach us on our website at chicagocolorlabel.com, or call us whenever you need something. We're always here to help. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.